Hausia comes from a multiracial background, an Aboriginal woman whose mother is Badamaya Yamaji from Perth, Western Australia, and her father who is African American descent. Kirsten's educational professional background is a Bachelor of Primary Education at historically Black College and University, Norfolk State University. She then obtained her Masters of Educational Studies with a concentration in Educational Leadership and Guidance Counselling at the University of Queensland. Kirsten is passionate about all things education and ensuring that nobody is left behind. Kirsten has lectured, written curriculum and private tutored school-aged Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children. Kirsten currently works at Murrab Barak, the Indigenous Centre at the University of Melbourne, where for the past 5 years she has had various roles supporting Indigenous student success. Kirsten's current role is connecting Indigenous higher education institutions globally with both Indigenous students and staff and ensuring a smooth Indigenous student postgraduate transition. Kirsten started a passion project called Culture Crate. Culture Crate is a space that focuses on the importance of diversity and inclusion in children and young adult literature throughout Australia. Kirsten provides book reviews, blogs, interviews and educational consultations. Throughout the Stage 4 restriction, Culture Crate was able to use the platform to give back to local Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children impacted. Culture Crate provided more than 300 books across Victoria to local families, Aboriginal kindies and schools. Kirsten also hosts a Black Girl Magic book club which allows girls from 6 to 11 years to connect virtually. All the books are Indigenous Black diaspora characters or authors. This allowed the girls to connect during tight restrictions and make great friendships with girls that look like them. Dr. Denise Chapman is a counter-narrative storyteller, spoken word poet and critical autoethnographer who lectures in children's literature and early literacy at Monash University. She served as a literary specialist focused on critical media literacy in Australia, Fiji and the United States. Denise uses oral stories, children's literature, poetry and digital images as counter-narrative windows for social disruption and liberation. When she's not spending her time writing poetry and tweeting, Denise enjoys obsessing over Afrofuturistic sci-fi pop culture media and purchasing children's picture books, black poetry and folk tales. Denise has been a repeat guest on ABC Radio National, was runner-up at Poetry Spective's 2019 Retro Slam, and has also presented her artistic work at the Wheeler Centre, Melbourne's Emerging Writers Festival, University of Melbourne's Digital Studio, Melbourne Spoken Word and Poetry Festival, RMIT's Present Tense Non-Fiction Lab, 3CR and the Community Reading Room's Black Tourmaline. She is currently exploring the lack of diverse transmedia stories for children and how teachers and parents see its impact on children's imagined possibilities. Denise is also working on a book of poetry and prose that documents her experiences living in Australia through the imagined point of view of her maternal grandparents whose Gullah Geechee roots are foundational to her storytelling. Her most recent publication, entitled The Crooked Room, Intersectional Tap Dancing, Academic Performing and Negotiating Black Woman Immigrant, is a critical poetic autoethnography that shares her wayfinding experience as an African American woman academic working in a white privileged Australian university, trying to survive systems of oppression unacknowledged by those within the university space. Emele is of Tokelauan and Fijian descent. Kai te umba, te kainga o Whangatiale, te kainga o Koloi Uhuea. She is a multidisciplinary storyteller. Emele works across live performance, film, TV and digital media as a writer, director, producer, performer, educator, consultant and mentor. Her work explores creative processes and outcomes grounded in Indigenous ways of knowing and nurturing the va, where embodiment, cultural expression, digitisation and neuroscience intersect. Emele has worked with Next Wave, Mangere Arts Centre, Ngā Tohu o Uenuku, Art Gallery of New South Wales, Q Theatre, Arts House, Playwriting Australia, Monkey Bar Theatre Company, WAPA, NIDA, Blackbirds, Campbelltown Arts Centre, Transoceanic Visual Exchange, Griffin Theatre Company, Belvoir Street, Darlinghurst Theatre Company, Festival Fatale, Fairfield City Gallery and Museum, Community Arts Network, PACT, Sydney Theatre Company, Warner Music, Sydney Opera House, the Community Reading Room, B Collective and Sydney Biennale, Casula Powerhouse, Solange Knowles and the Chinati Foundation, ABC, and Playmaker Media. A graduate of the National Institute of Dramatic Art and the Western Australian Academy of Performing Arts, Emele has facilitated intercultural theatre-making workshops at Union Theological Seminary, Columbia University, Arts Centre Melbourne and Melbourne Fringe Festival, Oceania Centre for Arts, Culture and Pacific Studies, La Bois Theatre Company, and guest lectured at NIDA. She is a sessional academic at WAPA and the creative director of Talanoa. Welcome everybody to the second in the Community Reading Room's MTalks series. The session today is called From Margin to Mainstream, New Narratives in Children's Literature. And we would like to introduce ourselves briefly. Now, my name is Torika Bolatagici, and I am joining you from the unceded lands of the Boonwurrung and Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I'd like to pay my respects to their elders, past and present. Denise.
Yes, my name is Dr. Denise Chapman. Would like to acknowledge that I'm on the lands of the Wurundjeri and Boonwurrung peoples, who are the custodians of this land, and I'm really excited to be able to talk and to be on this land, but also to talk about stories, because these are the connections that make us understand and know, and the knowing of the lands in which we're around. So through stories.
Kirsten.
Hi, I'm Kirsten Hausia. I'm on the land. I want first acknowledge that I'm on the land of the Wurundjeri people here in Naarm, Melbourne. Yes, thank you.
Emele.
Bulavinaka. My name is Emele Ugavule, and I am based on the lands and waterways of the Binjari Noongar peoples of the Biguma Nation, and it is a privilege to be here and share stories on these lands and waterways.
Thank you so much, everybody, and it is a real privilege to have you all in the same space today. I've admired the work that you have all been doing in your respective spaces for a really long time now, and I've been really looking forward to having this conversation because I think the timing is particularly pertinent at the moment, but all of you have been doing a lot of work in this space for a really long time, and so while we're talking about new narratives, they're not new to us. These are, continuation of narratives and stories and connections to land and ancestors that go back thousands and thousands of years, and we are just part of that continuation, I think, as storytellers and as people who are promoting storytelling and narrative and diverse stories in the different spaces that we work in. I think all of us are in higher education in some form, but more importantly, we all have lived experience of not seeing ourselves in literature and narrative in the mainstream, in our families, a different story, which we're going to get into today. But as carers of younger people in our lives, children, nephews, nieces, cousins, etc., storytelling and the next generation seeing themselves is something that I think we all care passionately about. So I wanted to start this conversation, I think, by maybe each of us kind of reflecting on storytelling in our own childhoods. And, we're of varying ages here, so we're spanning a few decades. And it's kind of interesting in thinking about that, how storytelling and has changed in the picture books that we've been exposed to and experienced through our own childhood, but also oral storytelling. I wonder if we could just start by thinking about how storytelling has kind of emerged in our own childhoods and our lives, perhaps. Who would like to start?
I'll start. I'll be the brave, bold one. Yeah, I'll start. I think when it comes to storytelling, like with my mom's side, since my mom is, Yamaji, and especially living off country for the last 30 plus years in America, she just told stories all the time. At some points growing up, I think I was just kind of like, okay, mom, the same old story over and over again. But the way she would sit down with us three kids, like she would tell stories to us about our grandparents, her siblings, just different experiences that she had that I could just visualize it. And I never felt so disconnected at all. So even though I was lucky enough to come back on country a lot growing up, but when I was away, growing up and, all over because my dad was in the military. So growing up all over, I was able to kind of have my family with me. So she just had a great skill with it, that she would just sit us kids down and just bedtime, or just when we're in long car drives or anything, that you would just visualize what our family members were going through, or good stories, funny stories, sad stories. But it's important because I know a lot, especially moving back on. I'm not living on country now, but moving back to Australia, I feel like I haven't missed a beat because I feel so connected, and I really appreciate that my mom did do that with us growing up.
Mm. That is so important. And Denise, I know you've talked a lot about and written about the tradition of storytelling in your family too. Did you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. Well, for me, stories are everything. All that we are stories. Our ideas of who we are involve stories. And actually some people say that, the concepts that we hold in our minds are actually metaphors, these approximations of what we see. So everything is story. And so my grandfather on my maternal side, my mother's side, he used to tell these amazing stories. They were oral stories, and he was his roots are of the Galagici people, which are peoples off the coast of South Carolina, North Carolina, Georgia, who were peoples who were stolen from various countries in West Africa during the times of slavery in the U.S. and brought intentionally to those areas to engage in farming indigo and rice. But I share this because one of the key things that connected these peoples were through stories and the stories that they told. And so my grandfather would tell us trickster tales. He would tell us origin stories, things about why things are the way they are. Why do dogs and cats not like each other? Why does that rabbit have a stubby tail? And even in how he would tell it, and the Gala peoples have a very specific way of speaking that is just, it's poetic. It's story in and of itself. So I have a deep love for and grounding in oral tales and seeing those as literature, because they really make up the quilting of who I am, the character of who I am. And so those trickster tales were tales that armed me, that prepared me, that served as that armor, as I said, for life, preparing me for the challenges that were ahead, as an African American, and now as an African American living here in Australia for 10 years now. I'm finding that I'm reaching back on these stories. I'm reaching back on those stories even more now. Yes, I'm reaching back on those stories even more.
Yeah, I love that piece that you wrote for the Emerging Writers Festival. I think it was last year it was published. And you talk about that tradition of your grandparents reading particular stories to you, but not realizing at the time that they were kind of providing this preparation and this armor for when you went into spaces where you wouldn't see yourself represented. And that really struck me in that particular piece of writing. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I think it's, if, like I shared before, when you think about, when something happens, what do you go back to? What do you go back to? What do you teethe on to be able to know what to do next? And a lot of that is based on stories about the characters that were in the stories and how they were able to in a sense, survive. And so a lot of the tales that were shared with me were ones that were trickster tales of being able to in a very witty way survive, and that things would be better. And so I take that to heart, and every day really feast on those, and share them with my children as well, and as well as my pre-service teachers and and the like.
Amazing. Thanks, Denise. Emele, your background from Tokelau and from Fiji is, a long history of oral storytelling, and that's certainly been a part of your practice as a theatre maker and as a performer. And Denise, we should go back to your work as a performer as well. But Emele, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how stories has played a role in your life personally, but also as a creative practitioner, perhaps.
Yeah, it's it's all I can remember. Really, like, I think my whole life has been this myriad of stories, especially as diaspora, of what the islands were like growing up. And my parents, like my mum migrated from Tokelau when she was 9. So she left when she was 9 on a scholarship to Aotearoa, and she went to the tip of Whangarei in the late 60s, early 70s. And my dad migrated from Fiji in his 20s, his mid to late 20s. And so both of them, I grew up with them telling me versions of the islands that they left, that they remembered. And for my mom, it was this like picturesque island that was untouched, and that was very much still, life was founded in traditional values. And everything was about the community and living off the sea. And for my dad, it was very much the same, but at the same time, there was a lot of political turmoil, and Fiji was going through, I guess, a cultural revolution as it was establishing itself and finding itself in the Pacific. And so my whole life has kind of just been this, working out this relationship between myself and my own stories as diaspora, born in Aotearoa and then migrated here to Binjara Noongar country, and working out what that means in relation to the stories of my parents. And also realizing that the stories that my parents have of their time of the islands and how that formed their identity is very different to what the islands is like now. Even, last year, like my mom hasn't been back, I think maybe since she was in high school. And for various reasons. And so her idea of what Tokelau looks like is very, 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 very different to what it looks like now. Whereas my dad goes back almost every year, and I go back every year. And our image of it is very, very, current, and the stories are like changing. And so my relationship to stories has been a constant negotiation about perception of what time and place and identity mean, and how they relate to one another. And that has also been informed by, I guess, how intergenerational my cultures are, and how much we value, elders telling stories, and especially sharing that pastime with youth or the younger generations or the incoming leaders. And so, what Pacific Islanders, from my perspective, are very metaphorical people, and that's something that I really love. I love storytelling through metaphor as a result, and I really value oral storytelling as a way to communicate lessons and words of warning, and so my practice is really deeply founded in that, learning these oral practices from my elders and from my parents, and finding ways to instill them in my contemporary creative practice, as a way to kind of, as frameworks to kind of work with myself, but also as lessons, as flags or little kind of like points along my journey to kind of, check in with myself about the way that they told stories and the way that I'm either mirroring that or reinterpreting that. So yeah, it's a lifelong love, my relationship with stories. And I think one of the most amazing things about it is that it's so generous. Storytelling is so generous. And so every time I throw myself into learning more about how people in my culture tell stories, I feel energized. I don't feel drained or exhausted by it. I actually feel really empowered, and I feel really aligned and really grateful that I have that to tap into.
And that really comes across as someone who's been in an audience of your performances in various spaces. It is such an incredible experience of that intergenerational, the way that you work with actors, and it's just such an incredible experience. I mean, it is just such a privilege to see your work, Emele. I have to say, and I'm really excited to hear about some publishing things that you have on the go. So we'll talk about that a bit later. I was thinking about my own experience of storytelling, and I was raised by my Anglo mum away from my Fijian ancestors, and my father, who lived in Suva, where I grew up as a very young child. And so I was really kind of removed from the types of experiences that you're talking about. And so for me, finding those stories has kind of defined my relationship to, I suppose, being critical of what I find, because, growing up in Hobart as one of very few kind of brown people in the 1980s, I was thinking about the stories that I would have had access to. And I think, I don't know if, Denise, you might know is it the Black Sambo? I mean, this is the kind
of my goodness.
And I think about it every time I go to cook with ghee. That's the kind of lingering memory I have of that story. Kirsten, Emele, I'm not sure if hopefully that didn't kind of touch down in your generation. But that is the kind of stories that,
No, that's oh my goodness, because when I hear you talking about those tropes, essentially those tropes, it makes me think about, in 1990, Rudine Sims Bishop gave us this beautiful metaphor of mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors. And it's this idea of, and why it's so important, because was that Sambo, a mirror for you? But, with the mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors, it's this idea that windows can, help you to look out at different worlds, different ways, different angles, at others being, their worlds. And that books can also be sliding glass doors, that they can allow you to fully enter into these amazing world spaces, and that are so different from your own, and that you couldn't even imagine, and to actually sit with these characters. But most importantly, is that, at least for me, and in relation to what you just shared, that books can be mirrors, these beautiful, intriguing mirrors, showing us stories that, that really mirror our ways of being. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, did that story actually, did it serve as a mirror? I don't think so.
I think it confused me, because it didn't match my experience. And I think that's what happens, and why I sort of see the importance of, creating these spaces where we surround our children with diverse, images and representations of themselves, because so often what we see, what we have seen, doesn't match with what we know of ourselves, and that, and that's where that kind of confusion, I think, comes from.
Yes. Yes. Well, and Torika, if I could jump in, I have to say that I can remember very, very clearly the first time I saw a book where the cover of the book was a character that looked like me. It wasn't in kindergarten. It wasn't in grade 1. It took up to grade 3 for me to be able to see a character that looked like myself. And I just happened to have the book here in front of me, but this wasn't actually physically the book. But when I saw this book back in 3rd grade in my school library, I went into a corner, almost cried, thinking, oh my gosh, I have something that is the most precious thing ever. And I found myself just in love. I wanted to style my hair like the character. I wanted to do everything like this character because she looked like me. And I found, well, I didn't give that book back. I didn't give the book back. I kept the book. I thought that I got away with it, but later I found out that my mother did pay for the book for the library. But I was like, no one is going to treat this book as well as me. No one's going to treat that book as well as me. And it was the first time that I saw that, other than the book, the Snowy Day, but that character wasn't a Black female character. He was a little boy who was African American, going about his day, this snowy day. But I think that being able to see that real mirror for me, it meant so much.
Yeah, actually, funny you should show that cover, because I was thinking about the first time I could relate to a character on a book, or in a book, and it was a gift that one of my mum's friends had given to her, or to me, and inside it was a Jamaica Kincaid book called Annie John, and in the cover she'd written, the girl on the cover reminds me of Torika in a pensive mood. So first I was in like sort of late primary school, and I remember first of all having to look up what pensive meant. And then, just kind of staring at this cover for ages. And it's still the same cover. I looked it up yesterday and it's still in circulation with that particular cover, and thinking, what does she see in me? And so, kind of trying to see myself reflected in that person and that place. And then thinking about the Sambo, and then thinking about these strange books that Mum had picked up at a fair once, which were called Fijian folk tales, basically. It was sort of a bit of a weird mishmash. But the people, when people illustrate, but they don't give people Fijian features, and so they're kind of made on this with these unusual European kind of sort of weird caricatures, and so trying to piece it all together. So in 2021, so much has changed in and around children's book publishing, and Kirsten, I know that Culture Crate came out of the need to provide children with more opportunities to experience diverse picture books. I wonder if you could talk about Culture Crate and, how that came about, and the kind of work that you've been doing with that initiative.
Yeah, I think Culture Crate initially came about because I work in the university sector, and I have no contact with like the youth really. And I did my undergrad in primary ed because I loved books, reading. So it initially started because it was a hobby, and I loved just collecting children's books. But my main thing was I was specifically one day finding a book for one of my nieces, good friends, daughters. And I was looking for books, and she's Aboriginal African-American Mauritius. Of course, there's probably not going to be a book about this young woman, but maybe one day there will be. But I was looking for books, and I'm like, I'm tired of this princess like mess out there. Like, it was just too much for me. So Culture Crate came out of like me just kind of like saying enough's enough. There's actually books out there. There are books, how can I explain that? There are books out there, but they're not on display. They're not really, so bookshops, libraries, teachers, they're just going to pick the most, popular book, for the young kids to go read, like the bestsellers now. But there's so many great books that are out there at the moment. Another reason, kind of, I want to touch base on what Denise said earlier. I think I was tired of all our books on both sides of my cultures, really just being very deficit based, right? So it's always something that was traumatic trauma. We had to have that good fight and power. These young boys and girls are just, they're just always fighting for something, which is important for us no matter what. Like, these books are so valuable for our young people. But it's great to have books of someone. There's a new book out called Bindi, and it's great It's a great book out now because she loves hockey, she loves to paint, she loves this and that, and culture is just a part of her life, you know? So I think that was another thing why I started Culture Crate, to kind of display those books as well, the everyday, you know, brown person, that we're not different. So another reason why, just showing educators, allies, everyone, and just parents as well of our backgrounds, because I have many friends and family that, you know, I love reading. I know these books are out there, but I purposely buy them or put them on Culture Crate, and they're like, oh my goodness, I didn't know that this person had a book, or you know, these were out there for our little people. So that's the main reason, in a nutshell, why I started. I was like, enough's enough, we need to put it out there. But with Culture Crate, I do things like book reviews on different books that do come out, like new or older books, because I like going back in time a lot. As well as I started the little Black Girl Magic Book Club during lockdown. So it started from a couple of my friends, and Denise's daughter is one of the attendees of it. They all come from different, I guess, African diaspora backgrounds, indigenous, Mauritius, Nigeria, all the sorts. And we read different books, and it's great. So I'm looking forward for 2021, maybe broadening it a little bit more, bring some young men in it, or start a lot younger. Yeah, so that's, also, before COVID, I was doing pop-up libraries, but I think with COVID now, I don't think that I will be doing a lot of those anymore, but a lot of festivals and stalls, I would bring a whole bunch of my books with me and lay them out, and then, you know, people can just sit there, no motive, but just for them just to kind of sit down, relax during these festivals and footy carnivals and things like that, and they could read books. So specifically would go to Aboriginal, like I think it was a Three Rivers Footy Festival. I did that about 2 times. But then I did one multicultural festival in Fed Square, which was really, it was different because we had a lot of people that weren't, you know, POC, that would come up and see the books. And that's what I want as well. I want these books in their household, so that we're not some like alien forms, or like something that's so like a historical, I don't know, like historical content, you know, when they think of Indigenous, Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander, they think of the Kimberleys, where they don't think of someone just playing, you know, hockey or things like that. So, yeah.
I love the way you bring it to like multiple spaces, you know, and to different audience, like you take it to them. Yeah. And it kind of just enables people to engage, you know, I mean, it's still on your terms because it's the books that you think are important.
Yes.
But it sort of just enables people to kind of, I guess kind of come to work without judgment. And, you know, Denise, you've spoken about this in terms of pre-service teachers, and, you know, often, you know, educators don't feel confident about kind of finding books that are outside their own experience, or don't feel like they have the knowledge or the right to kind of you know, share stories that are outside of their lived experience. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that and how that's kind of informed the work that you do in the education sector.
Yes, I think Kirsten's points were so delicious because particularly if I could almost take the baton and go with, you were talking about that you had children that were coming up that were of, you know, that weren't of the African diaspora or indigenous peoples, that they were, you know, white, you know, children coming up and wanting to explore these books. And those are the kids that actually need the books as well, that we all need these books. And I think that's one of the beautiful things that Kirsten is doing and introducing, that, look, I have, I work with pre-service teachers in early childhood and primary education. The majority of those students are white middle-class females. They, we just recently, it makes me sad, but while I teach children's literature, they're actually phasing aspects of this out, which makes me a little sad, because I think that from my experience, what I've seen is our teachers are, my pre-service teachers, as well as teachers that I see, are relying on what they've experienced. What books did they grow up with? What books do they see, just as Kirsten said, just on the shelf that are immediate and quick and easy to get? How many teachers are actually going and that they have the opportunity to dive in and to explore? And what we're doing currently, so I teach pre-service teachers here, but I also teach teachers in Singapore, and we're having them explore particular topics, issues that are hot topics that are important for parents and kids that they're trying to grapple with, etc. And how can I find a book on X topic? And so trying to give them purpose, that these books actually, or what I actually sing. I sing the song. It's a crazy song, a silly song, but I go, the crazier and sillier it is, the better, right? I say children's literature. What is it good for? Absolutely everything. And I let them know. I'm like, it is good. Do you know there's a book for that? Do you know there's a book for that? Do you know there's a book for that? And that's what I want them to do, is to actually be not just consumers of what's easy, but to be critical consumers, right? To be critical curators, to be curious curators, to be critical creators, because it's not just, for me, I honor, as we've all shared here, the power of oral stories. And teachers can make their own books as well. They can tell their own stories within that they've gotten from elsewhere. I would love to be able to see more, stories being told, not necessarily from the books, but actually performed. Poetry being performed within the classroom, going outside the genres that they're used to. And some of my favorite books growing up were biographies of scientists, activists, etc. I thought, I loved it. I loved being able to dive into other people's worlds. And so I think that's one of the things that we really need to work on, is with early, childhood and primary teachers or persons going into those areas, to actually see outside the space and to sort of disrupt what you think is quality children's literature and storytelling, to disrupt it, to dismantle it, if you will, and to look and to not, I'm going off on a tangent here, but just my last thing, that to not be a tick the box.
Right.
Okay, because what happens is that a number of folks I notice that are going into these fields that are going, oh, you see, I've got a book. I'm just going to grab this one. I got a book. You see, there's a Black person on the cover, and there's a Black person here. Oh, double. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's tick tick. And it doesn't necessarily, although I love this book, Talanoa, the Tooth Fairy CEO, but it's very often they find that they're just, I've ticked and that's it. And the characters could be very flat. The characters might not be, this book might not be, although this book is an own voices book. Is this book written by people of color? And I think that's probably some of the things that I want to put forward, that Kirsten, you just fired me up now. I'm getting on my book box.
I think what you point out is that, like, not all storybooks that have a brown character are created equal, right? So there are, that box ticking happens all the time, and so people just think that they're kind of, this will do. But the nuances of the characters or the relationships between generations doesn't necessarily reflect the diversity of families and family structures and all of those important things that children need to see represented. Emele, I think you've been working on a bilingual storybook. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that. And also you're a new mum, I hope you don't mind me mentioning. And so, you know, storytelling is taking a new role in your life, I think.
Yeah, it is. Yep, I'm a new mom of a beautiful 6-month-old. And again, yeah, I'm also emerging children's author. And I've spent probably about, 2.5 years working on this project, developing it. So the project, it's as Torika said, it's bilingual. In English and in Fijian, and it's called Au Sadau Tu Vatakeiko, which means I am always with you. And I started this project because, you know, I, as I mentioned before, children's literature, well, storytelling has always been a big part of my life since I was young, and children's literature is a really important part of that story. Growing up, my mom was a big advocate for me reading books. I definitely had 10 more books for every one toy that I had. Yeah, and I come from a family of really strong women, and really strong women who really passionate about literature and education, and so that had a really big impact on me growing up. And just listening to what you were saying about culture create, Kirsten and Denise, about your passion for literature for youth, that all of that really resonates. For me, like, my experience was that I spent most of the time reading books that were educational and books that were historical, more so than reading books that were about, I guess, that were fictional stories. And that's because I didn't have that many options where I felt like I saw myself reflected in those fictional stories, particularly when we moved from Aotearoa to Australia. Going to the schooling system here was really, really hard for me as a young kid, trying to see myself reflected and reconcile the differences that when I was in Aotearoa weren't really a big thing, but when I moved here, suddenly were like what made me different from everybody else. And so I buried myself in these stories of culture and history and science. And more so than stories of fiction. In terms of like literal literature, I found those stories of fiction in the oral storytelling that existed in my life. And so that had a big impact on growing up. Yeah, the kinds of stories that I wanted to see reflected in my theatre making practice. I create the stories that I want to be part of and the stories that I want to go and see in the theatre. And with this book, I'm writing a story that I wanted as a little kid, that that I wanted to read, or that I want my nieces and nephews to read, and that I want my baby to read growing up. And so the story essentially is based on Fijian spirituality, or the concept of spirituality, and what it means to exist past, present, and future, and how we understand time, and how as an essential part of our lives is something different to the Western concept of time, and as a result, how that informs the way we relate to grief. So for me, growing up, as I said, the maternal figures in my life were really, they were my world. And I was really, really close to my nana, my maternal grandmother, and my bumbu, my paternal grandmother. And losing both of them had a really big impact on me. And so through this story, I guess the story is in some way autobiographical, because the characters are named after people in my family that I really love. And it follows the journey of a young girl called Lucia, who is named after my grandmother, and her younger brother, Emosi, who is named after my baby, and my father, and my great-grandfather, and my great-great-great-great-great-grandfather. their cousin Wanga, who is one of my, not supposed to have favorites, but one of my nephews that I'm really close with. And so the three of them go on this adventure on the 99th night of mourning. So in Fijian culture, we have different, over the period after someone has passed away, there are different nights that we come together and we perform ritual and ceremony. And that happens over 100 nights. And so on the 99th night, we hear Latia in the middle of the night is woken up to the sound of her grandmother singing a song that they used to share together. And she follows that voice out into the distance, and her little brother and her little cousin tiptoe out and they follow her because they see her going off on an adventure. And all three of them accidentally stumble into the underworld, into the afterlife. And through the story, we see them encounter different characters in Fijian mythology and spirituality, and also the Fijian aquatic life, and with each character they learn something different about themselves and something different about their culture on this journey to them following their grandmother's voice. And so it's a way of sharing, I guess, Fijian culture, which I'm really passionate about, as well as sharing how we mourn, which I think is, for me, that has the way that I have culturally been taught to deal with grief has been, I think, a really key foundational concept for how I move through life, which is that you need time. You know, it's cyclical and it's ongoing, and it's not just like a bookend. It's like happiness. You don't just achieve the end of grief. You don't just achieve happiness. You know, you're constantly, it's evolving and you move through that. So it shares that for people who don't know about it, but also it reflects that back, the importance of that back to our children and to our youth. And the hope for me in writing this story is that, you know, because I know that my story isn't, you know, insular. I know that there is, because our households are intergenerational, often it's really common for grandchildren to be really close to an older figure, whether that's their grandmother or their great auntie or, you know, great uncle. And so losing that concept of losing your grandparent, I think is, it's really, it can be really pivotal in your lives. And for me, it changed so much, you know, it changed so much for my life. And so I hope that children will read this, or youth will read this, and they will see that in this journey of grief, they'll understand that our people are always with us, and we might not see them, but that they're around, and they're present, not just in spirit, but in, you know, in our sea life and in our plants, and you just have to look a little closely to see that, and I hope that serves as a reminder and a sense of encouragement and empowerment in those times of loneliness and isolation, and also, you know, self-worth, like understanding that we come from a really rich culture and it's a really complex culture, and some of those things can't be translated to people beyond your own culture or beyond yourself, and that's okay. But knowing that as I guess some kind of reaffirmation, I'm hoping, is what the function of this book shares. So it started off as a children's book, and it's still in development with, I'm working with an amazing illustrator called Elsie Andrews, who's also Fijian. And I've also last year was commissioned by Playwriting Australia to develop it into a theatre work as part of the Ignition initiative. So I'm one of 7 playwrights in Australia that have been commissioned. The only Pacific Islander story. There is a Torres Strait Islander story as well that's been commissioned as part of that. And I'm really, really, really excited because yeah, it's a privilege. It's such a privilege to be able to call this my job and to share that and keep investigating. And a really important part of this process and why it's taking so long is because of those cultural aspects, is because I care so much about it that I want to make sure that I do as much research and as much checking in and consultation and reflection on me and my biases, or where I don't know things, you know, being removed from living in Fiji directly, or, you know, I want to make sure that I keep just like chipping away and asking myself, like, am I doing the best job? Am I serving the story? Am I, or, you know, is that my ego? Or, you know, all those kinds of questions. So yeah, it's a privilege, but it's really exciting. And who knows what, or hopefully we'll see it. We'll definitely see the show in the next like year and a half or 2 years. And I'm hoping that the book will come out with that around the same time.
So amazing.
I want this book.
Yes, I'll ship it off to all of you.
I'm going to be buying. No, I will be buying at least a good, maybe, and I'm sure Culture Crate. Mm-hmm.
I will. And I think it's just so beautiful. That book is perfect of what I would have wanted. Like, it infused history, your culture, and in in a fictional way. Yeah. And also because my my husband, he's Tongan, and I'm also diving into Pacifica like books and literature, and I'm like, okay, what about whenever we are blessed to have children, I'm thinking I need these aspects, you know, because he has a very strong, rich culture as well. So I know that the book is, you know, Fijian based, but it's still going to be awesome just to kind of have that in our household. So thank you for producing that. And when I go to WA, I'll be there.
Yes, no, honestly, it's a privilege, and I wouldn't be where I am. I think it's always important to acknowledge, like, I wouldn't be where I am without the people who have written before me, you know, as you said, the Pacifica writers who have come before me and who really informs the types of storytelling that happens. You know, there were a few growing up for me, just a handful that really inspired my journey, which I'm sure is, as you've mentioned, the same for you, Denise, and, you know, growing up. But yeah, doesn't happen in isolation. None of it happens in isolation, right? It's always this ongoing conversation with community and with yourself, and and so forth.
Can't wait, Emele. It's just like it's going to be amazing. I've got
I'm salivating.
Fijian, Melanesian, and I mean, it's just because I didn't grow up, you know, surrounded by that culture and knowledge in the way that you have, and so for me, it's that opportunity to learn along with them, and so we share that together, and that, you know, that's just really beautiful. So I'm so grateful for people like you making these beautiful contributions. Thank you. So I thought we might move now, because we've been talking about sort of current publications. I wonder if you've all kind of observed this sort of shift over the last year in terms of, I mean, I'm sure we're all on multiple booksellers, e-newsletters, and, you know, sort of throughout the mainstream acknowledgement of Black Lives Matter, which we obviously have a long history with, the politics of race and lived experience of racism. I'm wondering what you've kind of noticed in terms of shifts in publishing, or the kinds of stories that are being promoted in mainstream spaces. Have you noticed anything? Or the kinds of things that people are engaging with?
I've noticed it, especially since Culture Crate is the main platform is on Instagram, so they have all that bookstagram kind of deal thing, whatever. But I appreciate it, but I'm also hesitant because I feel like, is this just kind of like Denise said before, let's tick the box and just put a couple of brown faces? But there's a lot of different types of brown faces here. Like, all four of us women, we all come from different backgrounds. So are we uplifting their voices as well? And how long is this going to last for? Also, I'm hesitant because there's a lot of people that are writing books that are non-POC. So it makes me feel like, I mean, that's great that these books are out there, but let's amplify, you know, our POC voices out there. You know, there's so many authors out there. So I know that sounds a little bit negative and Debbie Downer-ish, but it's out there. It's great that it is out there, and you know, we have a lot more allies, and people are wanting to get educated. But I think that I'm just kind of holding on tight to it and saying, I hope this is kind of, it's for the long haul, that our types of books, or not just our types of book, but more diverse books are brought to the front of the bookshops and brought, and published more, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And accessible, not just in the US. I mean, a lot of the books that I don't know about you, Kirsten, but I mean, I have to ship a lot of my stuff in from elsewhere, and then it doesn't quite fit within this space, right? And but I have to say that yes, there has been a shift. I do think it's a this is what's hot, moment, and I'm but until and I'm kind of cheating, if you will. I'm looking at my a story that focused on or the essay stories can make us help us fly that I did for the Emerging Writers Festival, and because I don't have these numbers right off the top of my head, but the Lee and Low Books 2019 Diversity Baseline Survey noted that the publishing industry still remains primarily white, that's 76%, 74% cis women or woman, and 81% heterosexual, and 89% non-disabled. And so, these are the people that are in power. These are the people that are making the decisions. Until you have, people like us within the space actually, making those types of decisions. Who are we going to take? Who are we going to listen to? Because Emele is making this beautiful book that I was just saying earlier. I'm salivating. I can't wait to. I can, as she was speaking, I'm like, oh my gosh, this sounds absolutely incredible. I want to share it immediately to everyone. But who's listening, how many voices, how many people get to be on that stage, right? How many people have access to these key people that are making these decisions? I'm excited about being able to see many more of us, and really truly diverse and rich, full rounded characters, not flat characters, not stock characters, but round characters like Emele had described. We need more, but until we make those big changes within the publishing industry, I wonder.
Yeah, absolutely. So I wonder now if we might look at some examples of some books that we're really into at the moment. Are there some books that you'd like to highlight? Because I know we're all into promoting great books. What have you got, Denise?
Alrighty. I've got a few things here. Well, I've got two. I'll just put two because they're like my children, and so to choose a few, I've got to silence the other. Just don't listen to Mama right now, okay? But one that I absolutely love, it's by Arthur Flowers, and it's entitled Brer Rabbit Retold. And this is a beautiful book. Actually, Arthur Flowers was here quite recently. He's an African-American man from Memphis originally. And he's basically retold the tales that my grandfather, would share, in ways that are quite interesting and still have a little essence of that Gala language, because all of us know a little Gala, but we don't realize it because we, for instance, kumbaya, that's Gala. It's not one word, it's several words, kumbaya. But these are things that are silenced because whose stories are heard, but anyway, I'll keep going. And then the second one that I want to share is Out of the Wonder, poems celebrating Poets by Kwame Alexander, and he is really hot right now. And I absolutely love this book. And what they've done is they've taken poets that we know and written poems in the style of the poet. So if I could, just this line here, snapshots celebrating Nikki Giovanni. Chris Coldry says, people forget poetry is not just words on a page. It's a snowflake on your tongue, a tattoo on the inside of your arm, a dashiki and kaftan tripping down the streets of Lincoln Heights, shouting from the hills of Knoxville, Tennessee. Poetry is barbecue, cotton candy, purple beets from Daddy's garden, and it goes on. But I absolutely love this book. So these are two that are my faves for right now. I'm sorry, the other babies out there. I love you too. I love you, but these are my faves right now.
Thanks, Denise. Kirsten.
So I think I'm hard. Like I think it was bad for me, like kind of like with Denise. So I'm gonna just show you a few. I won't do a big blurb because I just want to show you my favorites. So Bindi, it's the new Versus book that just came out. It's really good. And I had a little baby doll named Bindi too when I was, my auntie on my mom's side made her. I would not show you what she looks like now. It's a terror. Bindi, this is a YA book, so I kind of have them broken down by the bigs and the littles. That's how I do. So this is one of my bigs. You Must Be Layla by Yasmin Abdel. I'm gonna mess up her last name. Magid, Sudanese young woman that grew up in Queensland. I love it. I love it. I just think it's such a great book. It mixes in her language in it as well as just slang terms, and I could just envision just being a young girl growing up in Queensland at a private school, and that's Sudanese. So yes. So
what age group do you reckon that one is for?
I'm gonna say I had someone read it. She was 9,
Mm-hmm.
9 and up. It's really good.
Yeah, cool.
Really good. Okay, I'm gonna go faster. Girls Can Fly. It's like another Versus book. Mother-daughter duo by Sally Morgan and Amberlynn. It's really good. It's just all things women empowerment or girl empowerment. I love it. And one of my favorites is Briggs's book, Our Home, Our Heartbeat. I just love it because it's historical. It shows all the amazing Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander legends. And then as well as, this is a big thing for me that I loved. I love how they showed all of us in just different shades of our Aboriginality, which is really important for us because we come in, my family is all different shades. So I think that was really good, especially for our youth now. And my last one, I'm gonna show you. This is a Torres Strait Islander book, Back Here NB. I just love it. It's very long, kind of like a creation story, but it's very long, but the illustration is just amazing in it.
Wow.
Just very detailed. I love it. So these are some of my faves. Oh, one more. I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm writing them down. Don't worry. Keep going.
Princess Hair, because I hated my hair growing up. So I love this book. It's kind of a dig that you have to find it. I found this book in Australia, but they have them out there at a lot of bookshops, and it's great because it shows how we can wear our hair in all different ways. So it's really good. Yeah. So I'm done. Emele?
So beautiful. I love all these books, and I'm definitely going to be buying them. I actually lent out both of my books that are my favorite books at the moment to family members to read because they're so amazing. But I'll share the titles. So one that I'm really, really, really in love with, which is published by Tara Books, which is an Indian publisher. Is called The Nightlife of Trees, and the imagery in these stories is so incredible. So Tara Books publishes a series, or an independent publisher in India, and they publish a series of stories that belong to the Gond tribe, which is an indigenous tribe in India, in central India. And they're silk printed stories. So each book is silk printed and hand bound, and they're these beautiful, I wish I had to show you, but they're these beautiful black books, and the paper is all black, and they silk print these insane illustrations by Ram Singh Urveti. And in this book in particular, the reason I like it, I guess, because, and I keep coming back to it, is because of the stories are about, you know, the trees and their importance to the Gond tribe, and their imagination, and how they become to understand themselves in the context of their identity and place where they are. And that resonates with me, obviously, because of, you know, the story that I'm creating, and how I feel like, you know, children can, how important I think it is to find yourself in nature, and ground yourself in that. So that's a really great story that I love, and I keep coming back to, and I refound again in the last couple of months. And the other one is a Spanish book, which is called Mi Hermano Pequeño Invisible, which is My Invisible Little Brother. It's a beautiful little book, which talks about, again, the imagination, and about this young boy who has a friend who might actually be his brother, or might just be a figment, like an imagined brother. And basically you read the story about this, how this little boy goes about his day, and it's two-tonal, so it's in orange and in blue, and you read the whole story from beginning to end, so it's linear, and then you pop on some glasses and you read the story again, and you see his little brother pop up in little different ways in parts of the story, and suddenly you begin to see the world as this little boy sees the world. So I love that because it's textural. It shows us how the first time I read it, for me, that read as a very, like, I guess, adult reading of the picture book, and then the second way I read it as if, I guess, how this little boy sees the world, and how maybe the children in my life see the world, which is that, you know, there are little things and little people and, you know, parts of our imagination that pop up that we don't see, maybe because we're busy or because we choose not to. And yeah, I love it. I love that. And how stories, not just the actual stories themselves, but the way that they are told, can speak to the brilliance of the imagination of our youth, and that way those that, and I think this book and serves as a good reminder of that, you know, just like open your eyes and rethink it. How can you rethink this story? How can you rethink telling this story? So yeah, I love those two books.
Wow. I'm going to have to get you to email those titles, because they just sound incredible. Amazing. I've got a couple here that, I mean, my children are very different ages. So I've got 10, 12 and 4. And so a lot of books get recycled back down. And then, you know, I've got the older two are kind of in that YA space at the moment. So that's kind of a whole other kind of fun space to navigate. So there's lots of books that we've kind of collected over the years, but these are a couple that are particularly loved by my 4-year-old at the moment. Denise, do you know this one?
Oh, yes.
Oh, this one.
Yes. And yes, Julian Is a Mermaid. I absolutely, the visual, we were just talking, Emily was talking about imagery, that one, and also being able to see self, I think for some children, and this is a big one for people who, I don't know, I mean, he's looking at himself as this mermaid, and it's not a book that, you know, sometimes we've seen books where, oh goodness, why is my brain forgetting where the wild things are, you know, and thinking about the little boy going to his room and, you know, and the fighting the dragons and stuff. But this is him, you know, wanting to be this beautiful, ethereal mermaid. And I and the grandmother embracing it, embracing it.
I think that's what I love about it. It's just this beautiful expression of love, and yeah, it's just gorgeous story. And the other one is one we picked up in Aotearoa last year, called Something in the Sea is Touching Me, which is just fun and funny. And I think what you said, Kirsten, before about, because we've got a bunch of those books, you know, those sort of A to Z activists, you know, all of those things, but just to find stories of young people, brown people, black, brown, just exploring the world there every day, just being joyful and experiencing joy, and frightening stuff like seaweed touching your leg when you're at the beach. But I love this because it's a mixed race, same sex. So she's got two mums, and it's just a beautiful story. So they're our two favourites at the moment. But yeah, so many, right? And that's why we have our platforms that we use. So Kirsten, you're on Instagram as, is it _culture_crate?
Yes, but if you just type in culture crate, it'll pop up. Yes, and you can find me there.
And yeah, and so the book club is happening, and so people can find more information there.
Yeah, I'll be updating a little bit more. I was on a little holiday since it's the holiday season and things like that, but we'll be starting our Black Girl Magic Book Club in February again, and then fingers crossed that I'll get something happening, just broadening it out a little bit more. And the name was picked by the young ladies as well. So that was a thing. I let them they all brainstormed, and that's what they came to the table with no probing or anything. So that made my heart happy.
Beautiful. And Denise, where can we find you? You're on Twitter, posting.
Yes, at Dr. Denise Chapman on Twitter, and occasionally I'm on Instagram, but I think it might be under, what is it? Denise Chapman's Storyteller. And but those are the two places that you can find me. And you know, and of course that piece that you had mentioned before with the Emerging Writers Festival, Stories Can Help Us Fly. I really I don't know, it was really hard to write that one because it felt really personal. And so it's really nice to be able to share it. And so if anybody gets an opportunity, would love for you just to read it.
I love that piece, I really do, because it covers everything from memory through to, you know, you bring in the statistics that you mentioned before around, you know, who's publishing, who's reading, who's sharing, who's telling stories. And I think it's a really well-rounded piece. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Emele, this year is going to be super busy for you. And so, I mean, you're called Talanoa, and which is all about Pacifica people telling their stories in their own words, across multiple platforms and disciplines. Did you want to just talk a little bit about Talanoa?
Yeah. So Talanoa is a digital storytelling platform that was founded by Arieta Rika in 2015. And I took over as creative director in 2018. And we basically, as Torika said, we share stories from oceanic people from all over the world. So people living in country and people who identify as diaspora. And we're an independent platform. So our priority is holding space for people who want to share their stories in their own words. And as well as we have a core team, which is made up of myself, Arieta, and Malia Letuafa. And then we have a host of associate artists. So we have a bunch of associate artists who are diaspora, and some are associate artists who live in country, from Papua New Guinea, from Samoa, from Fiji, from all over. So Talanoa is really about by the people, for the people. And we're on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook. And we have a website.
Yeah, it's an amazing platform. And we will keep an eye out for news about your publication and your work coming this year. It's so exciting. Thank you all so very, very much for this time, for your energy and your contributions to this discussion. It's been really lovely chatting with all of you. I feel really grateful and privileged to have you all here. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Torika. And thank you everyone for sharing your stories and your incredible insights and heart. It's been beautiful.
Yes. I feel like I want to just hang out with you all now for a little bit longer. And I'm like, okay, so now here's the project. Let's do it.
We're at our own Black Girl Magic book club, I think.
Yes. Yes. Thank you all. And now everyone inspired me, and especially Emele. I might have to message you. I would love to talk to you about some YA stuff, because I'm like, oh, should I write a book? But I'm a horrible writer. But
yes,
have someone else write. I'm a horrible writer. That's why I'm going to stick to the lower levels, the children. But it just made my brain go. I'm like, oh my goodness. Thank you everyone so much.